My grandfather died when I was 29, and I want to be honest with you from the start, we were not close. That's not a comfortable thing to admit about a dead man, but it's the truth. He was a quiet, distant person who kept a careful space between himself and everyone around him, including his own family. He remembered birthdays with cards that were signed simply Grandpa Ray. No message, just the signature, like he was endorsing a check. My mom loved him in that complicated way people love parents who never quite gave them what they needed. My Uncle Dennis spent most of his adult life trying to earn approval that never fully came. My 2 cousins barely knew him. When he died, we all flew to Tucson for the funeral. It was a small service. Ray had outlived most of his friends and had never been the kind of man who accumulated people. Afterward, we gathered at his house to go through things, and his lawyer read the will. It was straightforward. The house went to my mom and Uncle Dennis, jointly. His savings were split 4 ways between the grandchildren. A modest sum. Enough to notice, not enough to change your life. Then the lawyer mentioned that there was one additional item, left specifically for me, a storage unit. Key taped to an envelope with my name on it. Handwritten. The only handwriting of his I'd ever seen, shaky and careful. The envelope also contained a single index card that said, Unit 14, take what you want, throw out the rest. I drove to the storage facility the next morning. Unit 14 was a medium-sized space, the kind people rent when they have too much past to fit in a house, but can't bring themselves to throw it away. Cardboard boxes, stacked neatly, a wooden trunk with brass hinges, a few items of furniture under a canvas tarp. I started with the boxes. The first few were what you'd expect: old tax documents, appliance manuals for machines that no longer existed, a box of Christmas ornaments. Normal accumulation. Then I opened a box near the back wall and stopped. Letters, hundreds of them, bundled in groups of 10 or 20, held together with rubber bands that had gone brittle with age, all in the same handwriting, not my grandfather's careful print, but a loose, quick cursive, feminine, all addressed the same way on the outside. Ray. I sat down on the concrete floor and opened one. They were love letters, spanning, based on the postmarks, almost 40 years. The earliest was from 1961, before my grandfather married my grandmother. The most recent was from 1999. My grandmother had died in 1994. The writer signed every letter the same way. Yours always, Evelyn. I want to be clear about what I felt in that moment, because it was not what you might expect. It was not anger. It wasn't even shock. Exactly. It was more like the feeling of a picture suddenly coming into focus after years of being slightly blurred. Ray, who kept everyone at careful distance. Ray, who signed cards with just his name. Ray, who had been carrying something heavy for so long that it had become invisible. I read for most of that morning. Evelyn lived in Portland, Oregon. She and Ray had met in the army. She was a nurse. He was a signals operator. They had fallen in love in 1959. And then, for reasons that gradually became clear across dozens of letters, decided they couldn't be together. Her family, his family, geography, money. The particular weight of 1960, which pressed down on people's choices in ways that are hard to imagine now. He had married my grandmother in 1963. The letters from Evelyn didn't stop. But they changed. They became quieter, less urgent. They became the letters of 2 people maintaining a connection they couldn't let go of and couldn't fully have. Not the letters of an ongoing affair, I gradually understood, but something rarer and maybe sadder, a sustained lifelong acknowledgement that the wrong choice had been made once and that both of them had spent decades learning to live beside that fact. At the bottom of the box, underneath everything else, was a photograph. Black and white. A young man and a young woman standing in front of something I couldn't identify. Some building. Sun behind them. They were not touching. They were looking at the camera, but there was something in the angle of them, the way they were standing just slightly toward each other, that said everything. On the back, in that same loose cursive, Oregon, 1960, the best week. I sat with all of it for a long time. Then I put it back in the box, carried it to my car, and drove back to my grandfather's house. I didn't tell my mom. I didn't tell my uncle. I don't know if that was the right decision, but I kept thinking about that index card. Take what you want. Throw out the rest. He left this to me specifically. Not his son. Not his daughter. Me, the grandchild he had never been close to, who had received the same sign-name birthday cards as everyone else. And I've spent a lot of time since then trying to understand why. The only answer I've come up with is this. He didn't want it thrown away, and he didn't want it kept by someone who had known him well enough to be hurt by it. He needed someone at the right distance, close enough to be family, far enough away to understand without being wounded. I have the box in my apartment closet. I've read every letter twice. I looked up Evelyn. She died in 2011, in Portland, age 81. She never married. Her obituary said she had worked as a nurse for 40 years and was known for her warmth and her love of letter writing. It also said she was beloved by friends and community, and that she had no immediate family. I think about Ray standing in that storage unit, stacking those boxes, writing that index card in his shaky, careful hand, and deciding that 60 years of silence was enough. That someone, even a grandchild he barely knew, should know that he had been loved, that he had loved back, that the distance he kept from everyone was not because he felt nothing, it was because he had felt everything, once, and hadn't known what to do with it after. In 2019, I entered a regional chess tournament in Minneapolis. I want to be upfront about my level. I'm a solid amateur. I've played since I was 12. I know my openings. I can hold my own against most casual players. But I have no illusions about where I sit. I'm recreational, not competitive. I entered mostly because a friend dared me to, and partly because the entry fee included breakfast, which in retrospect was an excellent decision. The tournament was organized by age bracket. I was in the adult amateur division. There were maybe 30 of us, a mix of people, mostly men in their 30s and 40s, a few retirees, a couple of college kids. Normal Saturday chess crowd. We all milled around, drank bad coffee, found our assigned seats. My first match was against a man named Gerald, who played with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb, and beat me in 41 moves. Respectable loss. My second match I won, against a college student who was clearly hungover and knocked over 3 pieces in the first 10 minutes. Then came the third round, and I sat down across from my opponent. He was, I estimated, about 11 years old. He had a notebook. A physical spiral notebook, which he opened to a fresh page and dated at the top in very neat handwriting. He had a water bottle with a chess piece sticker on it. He was wearing a shirt that said, "Calculate, don't speculate," which I can only assume he had found or been given, because no 11-year-old chooses that shirt. I introduced myself. He said his name was Marcus, shook my hand with a grip that suggested someone had coached him on this specifically, and opened his notebook to what appeared to be a pre-drawn grid. "Do you want white or black?" I asked. "I'll take black," he said. "White opens and I'd rather respond." I thought, okay, this kid has been coached, he knows some things. I'll be respectful, I'll play properly, I won't sandbag. He destroyed me in 23 moves. Not gradually. Not a slow accumulation of small advantages that eventually became overwhelming. He destroyed me like someone following a plan they had written down beforehand, which, looking at his notebook afterward, is almost certainly what was happening. Every time I moved, he wrote something down. His expression throughout was one of mild concentration, like someone doing not particularly difficult homework. On move 17, I realized I had lost. On move 23, it was undeniable. I tipped my king. "Good game," I said. "You played the roulette Pez into a closed position, but then broke it open on move 9, Marcus said. Already writing in his notebook. "That's usually fine, but your knight on f3 wasn't supporting the center by then. Do you want me to show you?" I stared at him for a moment. "Sure," I said. He spent the next 8 minutes walking me through exactly where I had gone wrong, moving pieces back to their positions, explaining his thinking at each stage. He was not condescending. He was just precise the way someone is precise when a subject is simply obvious to them, and they've moved past the need to perform any modesty about it. "How long have you been playing?" I asked. "Since I was 4, he said. "But seriously, since I was 6. What's the difference?" At 4, I just moved pieces. At 6, I started understanding why. I watched him play his 4th-round match against a 45-year-old accountant named Phil. Phil lasted 31 moves and looked like a man who had just had a mild existential experience. Marcus wrote in his notebook afterward, nodded at Phil politely, and went to get a juice box from his backpack. He won the tournament. Obviously, he received a trophy that was genuinely larger than his torso, and held it with the calm of someone who had expected this outcome. His mom took pictures. He smiled in all of them, with the slightly too patient smile of a kid who has done this before and knows the photos are for the adults. Afterward, waiting for my car in the parking lot, I found myself standing next to his mum. I told her Marcus had beaten me and had been generous enough to explain exactly how. She laughed. "He does that," she said. "He can't help it. He just wants people to understand what happened." "Has he always been like this?" I asked. She thought about it. "He just sees the board differently than other people. He sees it like a conversation. He's always 4 or 5 sentences ahead, and he's waiting for you to catch up." I looked Marcus up last year, curious what had happened to him. He's 14 now. He's ranked in the top 50 junior players in the United States. There's a short interview with him on a Chess Federation website where they ask him what he wants to do when he grows up. He says he wants to be a teacher. I like explaining things, he says. Most people are smart enough to understand anything, they just haven't been shown the right way yet. I printed that out and taped it to my monitor. I've thought about it more than I've thought about most things adults have told me. He was 11. He beat me in 23 moves. And he was still right. For 2 years, my neighbor across the hall was the most annoying person I had ever lived near. I want to establish this clearly and without exaggeration, because what comes at the end of this story might make you assume I was being unfair to him all along. I was not. He was genuinely, objectively, documentably difficult. His name was Frank. He was 63, retired, and apparently had decided that retirement meant filling all the hours previously occupied by work with maximum volume activities. He watched television at a volume that suggested he believed the characters inside it could hear him better if he turned it up. He had a dog, a large, enthusiastic beagle named Captain, who expressed happiness through sound at every possible opportunity. He was in the hallway constantly, not furtively, not briefly. He would stand there and have conversations with anyone who emerged from their apartment, apparently viewing the hallway as a kind of community living room. I worked from home as a freelance translator. Quiet was not a luxury for me. It was a professional necessity. I need to hear audio files clearly. I need to concentrate for long stretches. My apartment's thin walls and Frank's unwavering commitment to audible existence were not compatible with this. I complained to the building manager twice. I bought noise-cancelling headphones. I left a polite note. I rearranged my desk to the far corner of the apartment. None of it fully worked. My relationship with Frank was therefore one of careful mutual acknowledgement. We said hello in the hallway, we exchanged the bare minimum of pleasantries, and I spent a considerable amount of internal energy being irritated at him. He, for his part, seemed entirely unaware of this, which was its own specific brand of maddening. Then, in November of last year, I got sick. Not dramatically sick at first. It started like a bad cold. Fatigue, some chest tightness. I figured I'd sleep it off. I live alone, and I am the kind of person who defaults to pushing through things rather than asking for help, which is a character trait I have since begun reconsidering. By the third day, I was not better. I was worse, but in a gradual, slow-boiling way that makes it hard to identify the exact moment when probably fine becomes actually not fine. I hadn't eaten much. I'd barely gotten out of bed. I had told no one because there was no one to tell. I'm single, my family is in Michigan, my close friends are scattered. I figured another day and I'd be back on my feet. The fourth morning, I woke up and couldn't take a full breath. Not dramatically, not gasping, but something was wrong in a way that was hard to ignore. A tightness that wasn't like congestion. I sat on the edge of my bed and thought, I should probably call someone. And then I thought, who? And then I thought, I'll be fine. I'll just get some water. And I stood up. I don't fully remember what happened next. I know I made it to the hallway. I know I must have been able to open my apartment door. What I know for certain is that the next clear memory I have is of Frank crouching down in front of me, his hand on my shoulder, saying my last name loudly and clearly, like someone who has decided that calm authority is what this moment requires. I'm calling 901, he said. Don't move. Captain, sit. Captain sat. Pneumonia, it turned out. Bilateral. The kind that sounds almost quaint when you say it out loud, but is in fact serious enough that the ER doctor used phrases like, good thing you came in when you did. And another day, and this would have looked very different. I was in the hospital for 4 days. When I got home, there was a container of homemade soup outside my door, with a note in Frank's handwriting. Chicken broth. Captain helped. He did not help. F. I knocked on his door that evening, still moving carefully to thank him. He waved it off with the ease of a person for whom helping is just a reflex, not a transaction. I heard you in the hallway, he said. I was just there. You're always there, I said. And something in my voice must have conveyed the full complicated history of that statement, because he looked at me for a moment and then did something unexpected. He laughed. The walls are thin, he said. I know I'm loud. My wife used to tell me that all the time. He said used to. Past tense. She passed 4 years ago, he said, answering the question I hadn't asked. After she died, quiet started feeling like too much quiet, you know? So I fill it up. I stood in his doorway for a moment, with all of my 2 years of careful irritation, and I thought about that. About what it means to turn the television up, not because you can't hear it, but because you need something to push back against the silence. About a man who stands in the hallway talking to neighbors not because he's oblivious, but because the alternative is going back inside alone. "I'm sorry," I said. "About your wife. You want some more soup?" I said yes. I sat at his kitchen table for 2 hours while Captain leaned against my leg and Frank told me about his wife, about his career as a high school history teacher, about the places they had traveled. He was a genuinely interesting person. I had spent 2 years being annoyed at the surface of him and had never once wondered what was underneath. I don't work with noise-cancelling headphones anymore. My desk is still in the far corner of the apartment, but I've stopped minding the television through the wall. Some evenings, if I've been in my head too long, I knock on Frank's door and we have coffee, and Captain sits on my feet, which he does to everyone and which Frank insists is a compliment. Last month, Frank came down with a bad flu, and I brought him soup. Canned, not homemade, which he gave me considerable grief about. I told him I'd do better next time. He said there'd better be a next time. I think what I'm trying to say is, sometimes the most important person in your life is the one you spent years hoping would just be quiet. And sometimes it takes nearly dying in a hallway to figure that out.